When I say my house in the Peace Corps, what do you guys think of? Well, if you were like me, maybe you thought something like this. Or maybe like this. So before joining the Peace Corps, I ended up watching a ton of YouTube videos where volunteers took people around their houses and showed off their modest living arrangements. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers around the world live in thatched roof houses or mud brick houses. A lot of them don't have electricity. A lot of them don't have running water. So when I came to Guatemala, I felt like my experience was going to be something like that. Boy, was I wrong. And I want to show you what I mean when I say that my life here in Guatemala is so much more like my life in the United States than I ever could have imagined. And I want to do that by taking you on a quick house tour of where I'm living here in Guatemala. Seems pretty much like any other apartment in the United States, doesn't it? So, when I got to my site, I have to admit, at first I was kind of disappointed in a way. You know, I was excited to have things like hot running water and a washing machine, but there was this part of me that felt like, well, I'm not really having a true Peace Corps experience if I'm not living in a thatched roof house without running water or electricity or anything like that. And it took some time for me to start thinking about that and come to a realization that me thinking that my experience was going to be like that came from a place of prejudice. I had this idea of glorified destitution in my head about Guatemala. I had this idea of glorified destitution in my head about the Peace Corps, that somehow I'm going to learn more and have a more authentic experience if I was living in conditions like that. But the reality is that thinking like that actually only serves to reinforce negative stereotypes that I'm trying to change in the minds of the Guatemalan people themselves. At the end of the day, the work that I'm doing is trying to encourage people here in Guatemala to take their lives into their own hands, take their country and the future of their country into their own hands, and improve themselves through their own hard work. And if I were to give you guys an idea of Guatemala by showing you my house and it being just nothing but poverty, it would, in a way, prevent me from showing you a side of Guatemala that exists. The side that is middle class or upper middle class or even upper class. And the reality is that you can't boil down the experience of what it means to be Guatemalan just into the poverty that exists in this country. That poverty exists. It's only a few minutes walk away from where I'm currently living. But to deny the fact that people here in Guatemala have things that we have in the United States. They have electricity, they have internet, they have radio, they have everything that you could possibly imagine, any modern convenience. And to only show that poverty would really, in a way, be only telling a single story of what it means to be Guatemalan. So I came to realize that the disappointment that I was feeling at that time was really kind of wrong in a way. And in a way, it came from a place of me only being told a single story about the Guatemalans for my entire life. And I decided that I didn't want to continue that story. I wanted to show you guys where I live, show you that many Guatemalans live with things like Netflix, with things like iPhones and internet and everything that you could possibly imagine, all the modern conveniences that we take for granted back in the States. And I do so in the hope that I can help break this idea in the heads of people in the United States that Guatemalans are all poor. Now, to be clear, there are volunteers here in Guatemala who are quote-unquote roughing it. Volunteers who don't have water, volunteers who don't have electricity, volunteers who live hours away from the next major city. It just so happened that I didn't get assigned a site or a host family where I would have to experience that. And it's also important to recognize that my host family is comparatively well off here in Guatemala. There's no denying that, and I think, I have to be able to keep that in mind whenever I'm talking about where I'm living in Guatemala. But again, I really feel that it is important to show this side of Guatemala as well, to show that Guatemala isn't just about the poverty that exists here. There are people who are living completely quote-unquote Americanized lives where they have every modern convenience that you can imagine. And I do that because I don't want to tell a single story about the Guatemalan experience. There are a lot of people here who live this way, and to say that, well, this person lives in a tin shack and that's what it means to be Guatemalan just isn't true. And you know what? There are times that I do feel guilty for the way that I live, especially when I'm coming back from a day of being out in the communities and seeing the poverty that exists here. But I think that guilt helps remind me that there's really no way for me to be able to separate myself from the privilege that I have from just being a US American. I come here with a tremendous amount of privilege, and there's no way to deny that. And hopefully the guilt that I feel can be a good constant reminder of why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing here in Guatemala. One of the reasons why I joined the Peace Corps in the first place was to learn humility. But in my arrogance, I had this idea of what that humility might look like. Life is funny sometimes, and the way that we learn humility really never is something that you can plan out. And the humility that I think that I have learned is understanding that I had a really prejudiced way of thinking about Guatemalans and about Guatemala as a whole, and that through my experience I've learned the humility of knowing that I was wrong, and I was wrong to tell that single story. And I hope that through telling my story that all of you can see that poverty isn't a single story, that there's a lot more to a country and to a people and to a culture than just the poverty that exists there. And hopefully by showing you this, I've helped to open up a few minds about what it means to be Guatemalan and about what it means to be in the Peace Corps as well.